For more on the current developments on the repatriation of those SANDF soldiers from the DRC, let's now welcome SABC News reporter Khayelihle Khumalo. He joins me here in studio. So Khayelihle, good to have you with us. And this story just keeps developing by the hour. Yesterday, the president during his SONA was alluding to the fact that more diplomatic talks around how the facilitation of the repatriation process is actually only going to be deliberated upon this afternoon at their meeting. But we're understanding that the bodies have since left Goma. Can you confirm this? Has the South African National Defence Force also confirmed?
Well, absolutely, Alicia. Quite a very conflicting report in this instance. So the very unconfirmed report so far is that these borders now, they've moved from the DRC to Rwanda, obviously going that route because these countries are incredibly close to each other. So now they'll be heading to Uganda. But what is quite key in this process is that the South African authorities, they're working with the United Nations in this particular instance, especially because it remains a very volatile point, especially with M23 and other militia groupings really just moving to so many areas in the eastern parts of Congo. Really, after they've captured Goma, now they're heading to Bukavu, which is one of the very strategic towns in the eastern parts of Congo. So it's a very incredibly important moment, especially when you look at last night, Alicia, where the Commander-in-Chief, President Ramaphosa, declaring those 7 days for South Africa to mourn these soldiers, saying these are the country's heroes, but also trying to clarify that they were not just there in pursuit of any interest.
Personal
they were there
interest.
Very much so, especially after the speculations that they were there for certain interest, for certain business people. But the president really dispelling all those myths. But something that is quite interesting, the East African leaders and the SADC leaders having a joint summit in Tanzania. It's going to be interesting what's going to come out. Albeit today it's a ministerial leg. We do understand tomorrow then the heads of states will have their session as well. And what's going to be interesting is to see the facial expression with President Tshisekedi of the DRC and also the Rwandan counterpart, President Kagame. How will they really see each other under one roof?
And that's exactly what I was going to ask, Khayelihle, because I think in a recent interview by one of the international news medias, he had vowed that he was not going to sit down and have any diplomatic talks, that is Kagame, any diplomatic talks in terms of resolving this current situation. So what could have changed possibly in the last 72 hours?
I suppose there's a very clear understanding of the implications.
Or maybe pressure even.
Very much so, especially given the fact that this is a very long-standing conflict. And I mean, for example, when you look at the Luanda process that was led by the Angolan President João Lourenço, it's always been emphasizing the issue for the DRC and Rwanda to meet, to diffuse the tension between the two capitals. But I understand also the leaders within the region, for example, the East African Community Chairperson and the Kenyan President William Ruto, perhaps he was really just speaking to him directly so that they really reach that mutual understanding that a conflict is not in anybody's interest. The civilians for the longest time, they've been suffering. I mean, the humanitarian catastrophe that's unfolding in the eastern parts of Congo, it's really, really awful.
And very quite interesting that you mentioned mutual understanding there, Khayelihle, because one has to wonder then, the M23 rebels, we understand, have actually, I'm sure you heard in my previous intro, have actually called for a ceasefire, but we know that it was broken a couple of times since when it was actually first said. So let's talk about them as an entity. Are they invited as part and parcel of these peace talks? Because seemingly they are at the forefront of what this conflict is about. Has anybody thought about that?
Well, very much so. I think the East African community, they made it very clear for all the warring factions to have an opportunity to come through and be part.
Something like we saw in Gaza.
Absolutely. So that they really just get into the table, negotiate, so that they really just reach an understanding, so that they are able to really just find a long-lasting solution, especially because, I mean, looking at the really establishment of the M23, it's all about, the Tutsis' interest. They feel like the main government in Kinshasa is not really caring so much about them. So hence, they've been around because they feel as if the main government in Kinshasa is not so much involved in terms of really tackling the issues of the minority. So that's why you have this. And they're quite determined that obviously if there's no peace in Congo, they're willing to go as far as Kinshasa, which is about 2,000 kilometers away from Goma. So that's a bit of a very massive mention. But I suppose, Alicia, another very pertinent question is around the withdrawal of the troops. Will the SADC mission in the DRC withdraw? I mean, when you interpret President Ramaphosa's address last night, he said, we'll bring back our boys home.
Yes.
So that, it's really open to interpretation. Does that really indicate, or does it denote a total withdrawal, or does it mean those who are injured and those who unfortunately died in this particular conflict?
Khayelihle, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for this latest update. Hopefully, we can actually confirm whether or not those 14 slain soldiers have indeed actually started making their way back to the South African shores. That is SABC News reporter there, Khayelihle Khumalo, in studio with me on the current report or current efforts on repatriation of our fallen soldiers from the DRC. The latest indications, of course, unconfirmed at this stage, is that they have since left via Rwanda around 12 p.m. this afternoon.